Well, thank you, everybody. We'll get started. The traffic was very bad, I'm sure, for you also, in the rain. We will probably be joined by others later, because I think we had over 100 signed up by yesterday. But I'm very happy that you braved the weather, came on out, and are first here. Thank you very, very much. I'd like to say a special thank yous to our sponsor, Hewlett Packard, who interestingly, as we move along, you'll see how they're involved indirectly or even very directly in something else that will be discussed today. I'd also like to thank the Chambers of Commerce. Thank you very, very much for your support. These are the major international chambers, plus our friends from BCCI. Thank you very much. It's a great privilege and a pleasure for us to have you supporting us. Let's get on with the program as fast as possible. It's an interesting program. It's a series of integrated areas. Doesn't mean that we're going to have answers at the end of the day, but we will have ideas and concepts that will be evolving from what we're going to be hearing from a very distinguished collection of speakers. Our first speaker is traveled a long way. She's flying out this afternoon. She came late last night. Is Molly Morgan-Jones from the RAND Corporation at Cambridge, United Kingdom. She is a major team leader there in research projects, heads up major projects, and today she's going to be discussing with us something that we all need, whether we're in business or in the area of the universities, is money. And she has some insights that she's going to bring to bear for us today on the role of funding on science and on science development. And we look forward to that very, very quickly. We will be okay? Yeah, we're right. Okay, Molly, without more ado, would you like to do it from here, or you can go from here? Thank you, ma'am. This is yours now.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. Great. Thank you, everyone, for. Thank you. Can you all hear me okay? Yes, good. Yes, so thank you, David, for the introduction. I'm Molly Morgan-Jones from RAND Europe. We're part of the global RAND Corporation. We're a not-for-profit public policy research institute. RAND Europe is based in Cambridge. We have a small office in Brussels. And we work across the breadth and depth of government policy. We have a defense and infrastructure team, a home affairs and social policy group, and I work in our innovation, health and science group. So as David said today, I'm going to talk about the role of funding in research and development, and particularly in helping to kind of push research from the basic science through to having a wider impact on society. So sort of what are different ways of funding that can help support translational research. And I'm going to do that by talking through a couple of different projects and case studies that I've been involved with, or that colleagues of mine have been involved with over the years, that sort of provide a bit of food for thought and hopefully resonates with some of the challenges and experiences you have on a daily basis. So I'm going to just start with a short story from the book Alice in Wonderland, which many of you may be familiar with. I'm not sure how widely it translates into other cultures outside of the UK and America. But Alice in Wonderland is the story of a girl who goes down a rabbit hole and finds herself in this strange new wonderful land. And there's a scene in Alice in Wonderland which, if you know the story, you might be familiar with, which sees Alice and the Queen running madly through the woods of Wonderland. And the Queen is shouting, "Nearly there, faster, faster, faster." And they ran for a time in silence, and the wind is whistling through Alice's ears, and she just feels like she couldn't be going any faster. And the Queen is just saying, "Go, go, go." And suddenly they stop. And Alice looks around and says, "Well, we've not gone anywhere. We've been under this tree the whole time. And everything is just as it was." And the Queen says, "Well, of course it is. You know, what would you have it?" And Alice says, "Well, in our country, you generally get to somewhere else if you ran very fast for a long period of time, as we've been doing." And the Queen says, "A slow sort of country. Here you see it takes all the running you can do to stay in the same place." So what does this have to do with R&D and innovation? And I think the danger is that we run faster and faster, we invest more and more, but we don't really have an understanding of what we're investing in, why we're investing. There's no analysis and evidence that sort of surrounds that. And I think we need to sort of take some lessons from Alice, that we don't just keep running, we don't just keep investing without seeing any returns and understanding what sort of returns we're looking for. So investing in research and innovation, supporting innovation and research across sectors is more than just big prestige projects. It can be very subtle, it can be very nuanced. And in fact, I'll talk about a study which actually that we've done that shows that sometimes it's actually the smallest projects that can go on to have the biggest impacts and result in some of the most significant innovations. But it's very hard to know what levers to pull and how we do this. So where do we start in understanding innovation? Innovation, as I'm sure many of us know, it can enable profound socioeconomic, socio-political change, but we need the right set of policies, mechanisms, infrastructure, and systems in place. And there's no simple answer to any of these questions, and as you can see from this diagram, innovation can be very complex. There are multiple different overlapping factors that I think can influence the successful generation and utilization of science and technology. And there's a concept in the academic literature called systems of innovation, which really refers to kind of a network of institutions in the public and private sectors where their activities and their interactions overlap and help to introduce and spread new technologies. So I think we really need to understand this system and the rate and direction of innovation in order to make sure that what we're doing can have the greatest impacts on society. So one of the problems that we have is knowing where to analyze, how to analyze innovation, and then create policy from it. And I think there are many different areas we can look for evidence, and I'm going to talk through three areas that I work a lot in and have some of the deepest understanding of in the rest of this talk. So the first is around the science of science policy, so research evaluation, how we understand kind of what works in research funding. I'm going to talk about a few different examples of some new models of research and development that are out there, particularly around open innovation and open science. And then also around the impact agenda, which you might be familiar with in the UK in particular. Impact is being used as a kind of explicit research funding mechanism now, and I think that's leading to some interesting changes and developments in the way that the research is funded, and particularly in the way the higher education system works in the UK. So, taking the first point, there are a set of research questions around how to fund science, technology, and innovation. This is often referred to as the science of science. So the role analysis can play in understanding impact evaluation, and it means we need to understand the effectiveness of research and have many different sets of measures to do this. And knowing what works in science funding is really important because it can help inform decisions about which areas of science to invest in and determine how and who should invest and what we can expect. This is a headline piece from The Economist. It came out maybe 3 or 4 years ago now. You might have seen it. Called "How Science Goes Wrong," and the report looked at several issues about what happens when science kind of goes off track. It focused particularly on the problem of reproducibility, which I'll actually come back to in another one of our studies, but around peer review and kind of waste in scientific research. So the idea that we actually get lots of funding going towards the same sorts of projects, because we have a bias in the science literature around publishing negative results. So people often try the same studies over and over again, and this leads to a lot of wastage in the system, some argue. But I think it can also call attention to the role that funding can play into helping to incentivize different kinds of scientific research behaviors and models. And so some of this comes back to how we understand what we get from science, the economic returns, and case studies that can help shed light on what is working well and what are some of the core principles we can take from that. So these are 2 studies that highlight this in particular that RAND has been involved with over the years. The first one here, Medical Research, What's It Worth, came out in 2008 and was actually quite an influential study, and still is in the UK. And basically what the researchers did was they tried to estimate what the sort of return on investment was of scientific research funding in the UK, and they looked particularly at the case of cardiovascular research. And this is going to be a very gross oversimplification, so apologies to economists in the room who are here, but please do read the study, it's very interesting. But they basically estimated the amount of investment that went into cardiovascular research over a certain period of time. They estimated the time lag, so how long did it take from that initial research investment till we actually saw a benefit for patients with public health coming out of the study. So an example would be one of the biggest pieces of research they did was the research linking smoking to cardiovascular disease. But it took a long time for some of that initial research to translate and actually to have an impact, and you could start to see a reduction in smoking in the public. They then estimated the health gain, so the quality adjusted life years that you got from that research, which can be a monetary value. And then they used a rough estimate of the spillovers of research. And they came up with a figure that was 39% rate of return so for every pound you invested, you got 39 pence back. And this figure now is widely used in UK society to justify ring fencing science budgets. And it's actually used far outside the context of the actual study. So this study was done specifically for cardiovascular research. There are huge amounts of caveats and limitations, which are all detailed very well in the study. But now you hear people on the radio and politicians saying, for every pound we invest, we get 39% back, no matter what the field, no matter what the sector. And so it's just one of those examples of how a number can actually be a very powerful, an appealing metric for people to use. Another study that we've done looking at some of the evidence for how we fund and what we get from scientific study is a series of studies called retrocyte studies, which were then all summarized in this report you see here called the Decisive Report. So these retrocyte or payback studies were done with the Health Economics Research Group at Brunel University, and they looked across many different fields to try and understand the causal factors associated with wider impact from research. So we've looked at arthritis research, cardiovascular and mental health research specifically. And the studies help us to identify what attributes lead to research success and are based on the premise that it is not sufficient to simply advocate for more funding without evidence of what we get from it or how we support it better. And when we looked across all 3 studies, we found that there were some very common principles that came out that research funders and even researchers can really take on board if they're trying to think about how to make sure their research can have a wider impact and be translated into society. So Decisive is the kind of acronym to keep in mind here, and each one stands for a different principle that people should take on board. So the D was for different skills. So individuals, the studies found, are really key. And so supporting individuals to have skills outside of just academic research can be really important to translation of research. And so a clear message for funders is to try and support not just the development of research skills, but also those wider skills about how to translate their research into findings. into wider impact on society. E was for engage, so again, supporting researchers to engage with non-academics. Seems quite obvious, but many researchers don't often step outside the laboratory, but engaging with non-academics was a really key thing that emerged from our research across multiple case studies about supporting impact. Interestingly, we found that supporting clinical research, particularly in the health sciences, was more likely to have a wider social, health, or economic impact than basic research. It was a little bit of a controversial finding. We don't mean to suggest that research funders should not fund basic research anymore. It's just that obviously if you're supporting clinical research, you're probably more likely to see benefits from that accruing for society faster than you are basic research, which can often take a much longer time to sort of trickle through all the way to clinical findings. And it's much easier to track clinical research and trace the contributions to impacts on society than it is for basic research, which often will feed into many different areas. It can be harder to track back to the individual research project. If you're a funder, I was for impact on society. If you want impact, don't just fund for academic excellence. So again, if that's a kind of key goal of an impact funder, of a funder is having impact, don't just choose those projects where they have the highest academic track record, but look for a broader set of characteristics. S was for the point I made about size, so not all funding the biggest projects, the biggest grants was not always the way to have the biggest impact. And in fact, some of the biggest impacts on society came from some of the smallest projects. And I'm talking 20, 30,000 pounds or euros here. So really quite small projects actually could go on to have quite a big impact. The next I was for international collaboration was very important. So supporting researchers to have international collaborations, allow them to engage with a wide variety of ideas and potentially different uses of the project and expand their networks. Again, a V was for variety, using a variety of metrics to understand what the impact of your research was. So not just peer review, publications, citations, but trying to understand a range of different outputs and impacts that was coming out of your research funding. And then the final letter, E, was for expectations. So, really trying to get funders to understand that there's only going to be a few projects that are going to have some of those really big social and economic impacts. And in fact, I think there's a similar statistic from innovation studies in venture capital, which talks about, you should expect that only 10% of your projects are going to go on to succeed and 90% should fail. In fact, failure from an innovation perspective is just as important as success. So that's science of science. The next area is new models of R&D. And these are all experts from articles over the past few years, which specifically look at some of the challenges and opportunities facing the pharmaceutical sector and the biomedical sciences. That's where I do a lot of my work. And specifically looking at replicability and reproducibility, and how this is really a key issue, particularly when you're thinking about translating research findings in the biomedical sector through to industry. That industry really needs research findings to be replicable, reproducible, and that they thought there was a study, again, a few years ago that I think happened in Germany, but where they looked at, they estimated that it was only about 70% of academic research was not replicable by industry, which meant that they couldn't use a lot of those findings, they couldn't feed it through into their R&D pipeline. So a real challenge for industry when they're thinking about how they're going to use research findings and translate them to try and inform new drug discovery. And there's one model that's trying to address that, which I'll come to next. But first, I just want to talk a little bit about open science. It was a key priority of the last EU presidency, and there's been a big push on it within the European Commission at the moment. So you might be familiar with it. It's kind of a loosely defined and vague concept, but it's becoming, people who are involved in it almost think of it as like a social movement. People get really pour their aspirations into it, and it has many principles, almost like good governance actually, of sort of transparency, inclusivity, accountability, and it's really meant to be this idea that science kind of open up to wider society, that we share our research findings, we share the process of science with a wider community, and it sort of stands in for the belief that research can or should be more transparent, cross-boundary, interdisciplinary, collaborative, and participatory. And that can lead to science and research being more effective and efficient than it is at present. And I think it's an emerging concept. Some people say it's not a new concept, that open science has been around for a long time and goes back to sort of Mertonian norms of how we conduct science. But I think there's sort of a movement to try and understand, can it really make a difference? Can it transform the way that we conduct scientific research, and then perhaps the way that research goes on to have added value for society? So colleagues of mine have been involved in this project for the European Commission, where they're moving from not just open access, where all publications are openly available to the public, but really trying to encourage open science, the process of science becoming much more open. So you can see here the many different components of the entire research process and how open science, or different elements of openness, can go on to affect the whole scientific pipeline. And so open science captures practices across the research cycle, not just at the end stages, but from the earliest stages of idea generation. In fact, some of you may be familiar with things like Sloan Digital Sky, or Zooniverse, or the Reproducibility Project, so areas where we're trying to get really citizens involved in scanning large databases and becoming kind of partners and researchers themselves in the research process. So the European Commission has determined that these practices in the research ecosystem, if they get embedded, have the potential to increase the quality, impact, and benefits of science, and ultimately contribute to the growth and competitiveness of Europe. So if you're not already familiar with open science through Commission funding, it's probably coming down the pipeline very soon. And so RAND Europe has built an open science monitor to allow the European Commission to try and track and understand how it's doing as open science becomes more embedded in the scientific research process. This monitor, the project has just completed within the last few weeks. The monitor will hopefully be live. Many of you have worked with the European Commission. Sometimes processes take a long time, but it will hopefully be live in the next month or so. And it's a pilot, so it'll just initially track at a small scale, but then hopefully be rolled out and implemented on a much larger scale over time. But what the team did within RAND Europe over the last year is they determined there were sort of three main areas of open science that we could collect indicators and data about at this point in time. Now, this could open up in future, and there could be many more areas that we could collect data about, but these are the indicators and areas for which we currently have data. So one of them is around open research data, so places where we can actually store research data that's produced by researchers. And we have indicators at the moment about researcher attitudes towards data sharing. So some people run big surveys of researchers, and we can track that. Funder policies on data sharing, and the variety of research data repositories that exist. Then there are also a set of indicators and metrics around open scholarly communication. So this is around things like open peer reviews, journal policies on peer review, the use of altmetric platforms, so things like F1000 or Mendeley or altmetrics itself, and corrections and retractions that also occur in the scholarly literature. And then, of course, the whole area around open access to publications, so the actual number of open publications that are there, alternative publishing platforms, funder policies on open access. So in the UK at the moment, all funders have a requirement for publications to be openly and public, to be published in an open access format. And so a lot of this is starting to drive and change the way that scientific research is done and communicated, and hopefully by continuing to track these indicators, we can start to see over time not only how open science is developing, but start to move towards measures of effectiveness. So is open science actually making the research process go faster? Are funder policies about open access changing the way that we do scientific research, and is that leading to more impacts on society. I think that's still an open question, but it's certainly a trend that is emerging and will only continue to grow. So a kind of very specific example of this is a study that I was involved with, again, a few years ago about the Structural Genomics Consortium. So this is an open science public-private partnership. I think it's fairly unique, and it has an open access approach to the science it produces. So what the Structural Genomics Consortium does is it aims to determine the 3D structure of proteins. So it's kind of at the very basic end of the drug discovery platform and pipeline. But understanding what the three-dimensional structure of human proteins is important for further drug discovery and understanding where drugs can go on to target proteins within the body, and then hopefully go on to solve and help fight various diseases or afflictions. But everything that SGC finds out, all of its methods, every 3D structure of the proteins are made available to the wider scientific research community and deposited in public protein databases or published. There's no intellectual property rights that are taken by the consortium. And why this is important and interesting is because it's funded by a mix of pharmaceutical companies and public sector funding. So the fact that multiple, I think there's now 11 pharmaceutical companies and major players, many of the big international pharma companies are involved in this consortium, and they all pay quite a lot of money. I think it's about $4 million a year just to become a part of the consortium. But there's no IP that's allowed to be taken by any of the companies or the consortium itself on anything that's determined through the work of the consortium, which for the pharmaceutical sector is really quite extraordinary. It's a real change in the way that they work. And so what the SGC thinks it's doing is it's helping to be a catalyst for the field. It's helping to accelerate research findings, and that it's helping to so it's accelerating research in new areas by making all its research available with no strings attached, and it's created an open collaborative network of science in hundreds of universities around the world. And so what they argue that they're doing is they're trying to find out 3D protein structures across the entire spectrum. There are, it's sort of seen as the follow-on to the Human Genome Project. And when it was first started, the founders of the SGC said their claim that at the current rate of development of 3D protein structures, it could take over 1,000 years to generate structures for all human proteins. But they wanted to try and drive an industrial scale development to develop high throughput determinations of thousands of protein structures rather than rely on the individual efforts of any one group. And so the fact that this is all open access and it's all available to the wider research community means it provides a really interesting model for investing in knowledge with various incentives and disincentives, of course. But we found actually when we did an evaluation of the SGC, we talked to about 50 different people involved, both funders, researchers, and external people outside the SGC, what they thought about the SGC's model and how it was working. We found there were actually more incentives than disincentives, and that it was providing a new form of innovation. Open access was seen as very important to helping drive development in the field. It was providing collaborative research opportunities. And really importantly, these two bottom ones, it was enabling rapid and efficient research processes that really key for industry were reproducible and replicable. So industry, almost across the board, said one of the reasons they wanted to invest in and work with the SGC was because all findings were reproducible and replicable, and this was incredibly important to them because of that finding I talked about earlier, that they often found a lot of academic research couldn't be replicated in their labs. And then it also helped sort of this collaborative de-risking emerging areas of science. So many pharmaceutical companies said, well, they might want to move into a new field. They didn't necessarily have the capacity in-house to do that, and it could be very expensive for them to build that up. But by joining the SGC, where there was already that capacity because other pharmaceutical companies had it, where they were sending researchers to work in the collaborative labs of the consortium, they didn't have to, they could get that benefit and that knowledge at a much lower cost, so that they saw it as a really key way to de-risk new areas of science for themselves. Of course, there were some disincentives. Many people in the private sector said there was unprotected intellectual property, and sometimes this was a real challenge, particularly for lawyers within the companies, that they couldn't patent anything. And interestingly, the public sector funders said they were concerned at times about limited opportunities for spillover effects. It was very hard to track what the spillovers of the SGC research was, often because it was sort of basic in nature relative to other areas of drug discovery. So tracking spin-out companies and investments coming from the SGC could be difficult, and that could make it harder for the public sector to understand what their return on investment was. So, what did we learn about kind of open science and this new model of R&D? It really was challenging ideas about the way health research and pharmaceutical sectors work together, but the SGC did demonstrate that open access platforms could be viable in the pharmaceutical sector and did provide a new way of conducting R&D in this sector, and really, I think, opened up our understanding of openness in innovation. So the final area I want to talk about is the role of impact, and particularly the effects that that's having in the UK at the moment. So in the UK, funding is distributed in two different ways. One is through competitive research grant funding, so applying to research councils, the European Commission, or anywhere else. But then there's also a block grant funding system that comes from our Higher Education Funding Council. And every 4 or 5 years, they run a national research assessment exercise called the REF, where they assess the quality of research that's coming out of all UK universities. And traditionally, for the last 20, 30 years, this has all been done on the basis of the quality of the academic publications. In the last REF they did in 2014, they introduced impact as a component of the research funding formula. So impact was worth 20% of the overall score that someone got. And this is very significant, and I think we're starting to see this impact agenda really starting to drive funding behaviors in a range of different countries around the world, now that the UK has demonstrated that it can be successful. But it has some implications. One of the positive things it's done is it's shown that there were many different impacts coming out of UK research. I know you can't read this, and I apologize for that. This is the report that this figure comes from. But essentially, these are all of the different areas of impact that came out of the REF. There are about 60 in total, and they range from impacts like here, this is community and local government, impacts on climate change, all the way over here, business and industry, cancer, medical ethics. So it shows, and a lot of these are quite interconnected. So there's a lot of these kinds of diagrams here showing that there are many different kinds of impacts, and in fact, many case studies highlighted many different kinds of impacts within them. And they also found, I definitely can't read this, so all the different areas of research that came out of that occur across the UK, and again, that they feed into many different areas of impact. So again, these are just, you're just meant to kind of appreciate all the nice squiggly lines here. But so one of the key questions people had going into the REF was, can you actually demonstrate the impact of research at scale? And the way that the funding bodies wanted researchers to do that was to write 4-page case studies. So it was a very qualitative approach to understanding impact. They all had to be assessed and read by the assessment panels. And in the end, the UK generated over 7,000 impact case studies that are all publicly available on the Higher Education Funding Council website. You can go through and read through them. And then this report, where these figures came from, went through and kind of tried to systematically analyze and categorize all the different kinds of impacts. So for all purposes, there was a big yes, tick mark that yes, this was a success. You could demonstrate the areas of impact that were occurring in UK research. What you can now do with that, can you start to understand the returns or the benefits, I think is still a question that the Treasury and other policymakers are trying to grapple with. What we did was we did an evaluation of the whole process. How did researchers find it, and what were the implications that were now occurring for the way that research was happening within the UK? And we have two main different reports on this that are both available on our brand's website. But we did find that there were a number of benefits and changes in practice that were occurring in higher education institutes as a result. The most frequently mentioned benefit was that researchers felt like they had an increased ability to identify and understand the impact of their research. And in particular, they were able to understand how to set out an impact strategy, how to capture evidence of their impact on an ongoing basis. And they were beginning to build a plan for impact into their projects from the very beginning. So they were thinking about what kinds of impacts their researchers can have. So this is like open science, it is changing behaviors in the way that research is happening. Also changing behaviors in the way that higher education institutions are functioning. So we did see people, universities reporting that fixed term posts were becoming permanent, particularly for researchers that were seen to be high impact researchers. Inclusion of impact was now being, impact was now being included as a criteria for promotion, not just publishing in 4-star journals, and universities were starting to implement systems to store evidence of impact. So even though impact wasn't required from every single researcher that was included and returned in the research excellence assessment exercise, there was a requirement that only about 10% of your research needed to have an impact. We are starting to see that universities are changing their practice in a way that's affecting much more, I think, than 10% of their research. And certainly we hear anecdotal reports that all researchers are being encouraged to think about their impact from the very beginning. So this perhaps has some unintended consequences as well, again, which is just important for funders to be thinking about if they're considering introducing impact. It could result in a focusing of research activities away from blue skies research into more applied questions. For those of you who are applied researchers, this could be seen as a very welcome thing. There's a constant, I think, gripe in the research community that applied research often doesn't seem to be taken as seriously as basic research. This was certainly something that many UK academics in different fields have felt, and the journals aren't seen to be as high quality, so perhaps this is putting more emphasis on them. But if you're a more basic researcher, this could be seen as a real threat to your area of research. It also may move research toward areas that can more easily demonstrate impact and away from areas where impact is less easily demonstrated. So a good example of this is humanities and social science research. How do you define cultural impact? How do you evidence it? Very tricky, kind of slippery concepts. And are we really moving towards an area where every time you go, a member of the public goes to a play or a museum exhibition, that you then have to fill in an evaluation about how that affected your life and changed your outlook and so on and so forth? Or does it mean that for every big, research project that we do in any field, you have to do a big economic return study on it to find out what the return on your investment is? I don't think that's what anyone wants to happen, but it is certainly what people are thinking is needed, and I think that's potentially very problematic. And then it really only, the exercise itself only captured a sliver of all the impact. There were very strict rules about what could be included, how you articulated it. And so even though there's now this repository of 7,000 case studies, many argue it's only a sliver of all the impact that is actually going on. So again, an example of how when funders change their criteria, change their behavior, it change the way that they fund research, we can see really quite significant responses within the research community. But again, I think this is something that's not going away, and indeed we're seeing spreading to other countries. So important to understand as a researcher and a funder what you might be able to do and how to maximize benefits and minimize some of the consequences. So just to conclude, we've had kind of 3 different areas we've talked about. I think we need to continue to develop evidence for and understand what's going on in these areas in order to best inform how we fund research. And I think if we do this, evidence will help us to deliver translational funding opportunities and ways of maximizing the impacts and wider benefits research can have on society, helping to maximize opportunities which connect people, policies, institutions, and science in new ways, maximizing impact and evidence monitoring how it's working and why it's going well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We're going to, immediately after the luncheon break, have many of the presenters here, so you can address any questions to them at that time. I'm very interested in what you're saying, because my small presentation later is about the sort of US national network for manufacturing. And basically what they are doing is pushing massively to rapidly move science into application. Can you hear me?
Okay, I
feel
much better. Yeah, beg your pardon. Thank you. Thank you for the translators. You should bang on the door. Okay. Carried away there. So anyway, very interesting, because what the US are doing is bringing business and science together from day one. And the vast amount of money going into these major institutes is commercial, private, corporate money with substance supported by the US government. But we'll come back to that. So it's moving very aggressively across a range, everything from photonics to fabrics. It's amazing what's going on. So that's obviously something that needs to be focused on going forward. Where are we going? What are we doing with this? Why are we doing it? Now, I realize there's basic research, I don't want to get in trouble there, but it's very interesting. It seems to be that this is growing across the spectrum. Our second speaker, Dr. Tobias Engert from GSI, major research institution that most of you will know. Started life as an engineer, went into nuclear, and then subsequently learned just about everything there is to know about intellectual property. He is the head of the TTO at GSI. He also travels widely, is known widely, and really is perhaps one of the best guys we could have possibly got to come and talk to you today about intellectual property.
David, thank you very much. Yeah. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tobias Engert. I'm from the Helmholtz Center for Heavy Iron Research. Yeah. Great. So now, my name is Tobias Engert. I'm the head of technology transfer from GSI. GSI is a Helmholtz Center close to Frankfurt in Germany. And I will tell you something about GSI, because you have to understand what we've done after, or based on this research institute, what was the situation in the past, in fact, from 2013 till now, to understand a little bit more what I present. However, the transfer of the introduction of GSI, of course, transfer away from invention to innovation, property rights, it's in the topic, and a few samples validation projects with financial instruments, what we have in Germany. And last but not least, this is more or less the main topic or the main reason for our strategy in GSI. However, the technology transfer is dependent from the mentality and the culture of the university or research institute. And in GSI, for example, we established in 1969. We have now approximately 2,500 guest scientists per year. We have 1,350 employees at the moment. Yeah, we have an accelerator in GSI for nuclear structure physics. So we are a basic research institute. So, in fact, basic research in nuclear structure physics. More or less, no application. However, These are our topics in the research field. In fact, we have approximately 50% in nuclear structure physics. We have atomic physics, biophysics, plasma physics, material research, and accelerated technologies. For this research, we are using an accelerator. In fact, we have here an ion source, a LINAC, so we can accelerate the ions of 20% of the light speed. We have here a synchrotron, so we can accelerate of 90% of the light speed. And at the end, the ions can come to an experiment. That is a short overview about our experiments in GSI. Ship, harness, rising. There are synonyms for English word for big collaboration. In fact, mostly a European or international collaboration. Success stories are GSI developed or discovered the last 6 elements in the periodic system. We discovered several hundreds of new isotopes. And for example, the biophysics department in our company, they developed a new cancer treatment for tumors. Well, and now I'm doing their technology transfer. What is, in your case, I mean, you saw it in the first in the presentation before. I have a question to you. What is, in your mind, impact? Pardon?
The money from the education and science to the industry and society.
Okay, good. Other meaning?
The development of society.
The development of science.
Society.
Society, development of society. Mm-hmm.
Because
Okay.
it's the whole point.
And can you say, for example, in degrees or in hardware, in software, what do you mean with that exactly?
The science includes everything. Science, technology, economy,
Okay,
and health and behavior.
good. Other meaning? Because why I ask is, this is not in every university, research institute, and of course from the economic side, the same. I learned this in Germany. Well, in our case, it's not so complicated. It's a little bit easier. Well, at first, we have invention, idea, more or less. This wording, by the way, innovation, it means demonstrated. So, in fact, we produce knowledge. Then, in GSI, of course, we can, or we decide, what can we do with this knowledge? And then we have different transfer options. In fact, degrees from the university, for example, and by the way, at the moment we have over 600 degrees per year in GSI. Publications, of course. Then collaboration or projects, in fact, to create a demonstrator, or patenting, licensing, or spin-out, spin-offs. We have no more. Only this for GSI. And by the way, these are the classical performance numbers which we have to report to our shareholders. Our shareholders are the government, or in fact Germany, and the countries Hessen, Thüringen, and Rheinland-Pfalz. However, if we have such kind of idea, what can we do with it? And this describes more or less a way. From the screening, we have to find a market. We have to find the application. In fact, the basic researcher They see only the research and not left and not right. Only focused on the research. And that is good. But you have to talk a bit with these guys and you have to say, what can you do with this? Well, you developed a sensor, for example, to discover the nucleus. Maybe it's possible to involve this technology also in medicine or for other sensors. However, then comes to the validation step. And this is a valley of death. I come later to this. Of course, then the application, and last but not least, you must come in the market. Well, that's also a shame, so in fact, on one hand, the patenting way, ideas, screening, the patenting, validation. On the other hand, you have to check the application. Is it possible, the idea? Market analysis and the way of transfer, you have to know it a bit. And of course, don't forget, I come later to this, you need money. You need money to create a project and to do this way. And quite important, you need two things: the IP policy and transfer guidelines, which describe these two ways. And if you have a little bit your framework, then you can work in it. Well, I mean, this is an overview about our two sectors, technology-driven or market-driven sectors. In fact, GSI, we are in this sector, technology-driven. If you're from the economy side, you have a market, so you're on the market side. So, and now I said, beginning, I talk about 2013. A bit history. GSI developed in the 90s this cancer treatment, this tumor treatment. And at this time, I mean, that was enough for a basic research institute, because the colleagues, they want Siemens, the company Siemens, for this business. To this time, we had approximately 2.5 million return of licensing from Siemens per year. They developed clinical for clinical. And then with a strategy switch from Siemens 2009, 2010, they went out. Well.
You mean they left the business?
Yeah, they left the business completely. So, and then we as GSI, we had at this time a patent portfolio from 640 national and international patents. So in fact, a lot of costs. And by the way, to this time, inside of GSI, of course, we had Siemens, the portfolio Siemens, and the rest. Then we selected. We said at the first came, the complete portfolio, we have to select it. What are our other ones? Not only Siemens. Then I said before, we defined an IP policy and transfer guidelines. That was the first thing, based on this analysis. Then we said for every patent, we described it. Only one exposé. And a few things of this exposé are quite important. The last one, in which status is this patent? Is it an idea? Is it a demonstrator? Prototype? The next one, of course, some information. Of course, is it possible to get third-party funds and status, legal status, and so on. So we described on this exposé how can we handle this IP. Oh, and by the way, market. Which companies are in the market of this field or in this field? Then we selected these 640 patents and said directly with a traffic system. Red, we went out. Green, we keep it. Yellow, next year. Orange. Huh? So, because we have not the manpower to handle 650 patents, in fact. However, in 1 year we reduced under 300 in the first year. That was also dependent not of the what was described in or what is in the idea. There was other parameters. In fact, what is the economic side? Is it possible to come to a validation? What is the age of the patent, of course? Because you cannot come with a patent which is, I don't know, 15 years old, huh? And now you say, ooh, now we create a project. It's nonsense. However, also one criteria, of course, and this is from the NASA, that is the readiness level. In fact, we classified all technologies. We're in a basic research status or in the market. Well, and then was one thing that we said, money. Because from GSI, to get money for validation projects, that is not in budget. So you have to find the right instrumentations for validation. And we in Germany, we have such kind of several. Here a few more, my famous one. For example, here we have WIP Plus, that is from the Research Ministry. This is, you can have, or you can achieve 1.5 million in 3 years to create a validation project with a target to transfer. This, for example, this is my personal best one. It's quite easy. You have not this administration and not such kind of reporting. And maybe you know it in Germany, reporting and controlling from the government side, it's or administration, it's amazing. However, this, for example, is one of the important tools in GSI because also the limit, it's not so high and not too low. And a lot of these patterns, what we have, or ideas, inventions, what we have, you need not such kind of, or a lot of money. You need so approximately 50 to 100,000. However, two other ones. One is from the Helmholtz Association, a financial instrumentation, and one is from the Economic Ministry. This is also nice because I have to say before that in technology transfer is dependent on the mentality and culture of the institution. And in our case, in GSI, the transfer culture is more or less licensing. That researcher create a spin out is the chance is one sample in a decade. It's relevant. However, licensing, and in fact, this is also a nice tool because this is together with a company. Research institute and a company create a project for a validation project. So, this is one sample what we done for the project video. This was funded from WIP Plus, what I described before. And it was also quite nice because that is IP management in GSI is not only IP management, but it's also project management and so on. And you know, if you have a project, then during this time, a lot of other opportunities can come and so on. However, at the first we had an idea for a new detection system. So we said, okay, there's a market, okay. However, we written a proposal for in the research ministry for WIP+. We created property rights before and so on, and then we found out it's not running.
Der Gammastrahl.
Excuse me, it's not running. In fact, or in this case, that they detect high energy X-rays, neutron detection. But with neutrons in the market, it's really low. But during this development from the demonstrator, the scientists, they developed a new novel other measurement system to detect sources in the direction without collimator. And this is novel, this is new. Now that we had this case that we had all the results and spectrums and so on, and then we said, if I send this information, for example, to the government, to the Homeland Security government, I believe they cannot understand what we are doing. Then we said, oh well, we need a right marketing, that everyone can understand what we are doing. Then we started with movies. Short movies to describe our developments. And this
Der Gammastrahlendetektor WIDEO im Einsatz für exakte Messungen in Umweltschutz, Personenkontrolle, Terrorabwehr und überall dort, wo erhöhte Radioaktivität vermutet wird. Das tragbare Gerät lässt sich einfach transportieren und bedienen. Dabei überzeugt es mit einer Messgenauigkeit von 2 Grad Richtungsauflösung bei einer Reichweite von 0,5 bis 30 Metern. Als Detektoren werden Szintillatoren verwendet, deren Zählrate proportional zur Intensität der erfassten Gammastrahlung ist. Diese Szintillatoren sind in bestimmten Winkeln zueinander angeordnet, sodass sich aus ihrem Zählratenverhältnis die Richtung der Strahlenquelle algorithmisch bestimmen lässt. Der WIDEO Gammastrahlendetektor kann in Kraftfahrzeugen verbaut werden und bietet dann noch höhere Reichweiten und eine exaktere Auflösung. Funkübertragung der Daten zu einer Basisstation sowie die Möglichkeit, das Gerät als Spektrometer zu nutzen, machen es ideal für den Einsatz an Kraftwerken oder im Umweltschutz. Dank der implementierten Datenbank können Isotope schnell identifiziert werden. WIDEO liefert spektrometrische Daten und zeigt den Standort einer radioaktiven Quelle punktgenau an. Ob für die Messung natürlicher Strahlungsquellen oder zum Aufspüren künstlicher Ansammlungen von radioaktivem Material. WIDEO bietet ortsspezifische Detektion bei hoher Sensitivität in einem handlichen Gerät.
Well, excuse me, that was German. We have to optimize this video too, of course. But what I will show is not directly this technology. I will say we switch with all. And also for us was one target to develop a right marketing. We need marketing. Important. Well, so other sample. My favorite one, by the way. We created, based on an idea, a project. It's called Aldi. It's not a supermarket in this case. This is a synonym for a German long wording. However, the idea based off an experiment is called AGATA. AGATA is for Advanced Gamma Ray Tracking Array. And it's a pure nuclear structure physics array. And for this AGATA, we have here such kind of detectors, germanium detectors in fact. And they're really expensive. And one thing was, this encapsulation from these detectors, we can we have to handle it a little bit easier, and yeah, there's really expensive and so on. And then the next one was the parameters. In fact, from the technology side, they are really high. Then we said, of course, in this ONI project, we selected this in different steps, and I talk now about welding, by the way. Welding. One thing, everyone can do it. Everyone is good. And so we developed encapsulation, welding, and so on, and also here was the feed throws. Well, that was a project from the economic ministry, because this welding combination, copper and aluminium, that was really high level to weld this. However, together with partners, it was a company LMP close to Dortmund, and other laser research institution in close to Hanover, LZH. We used the funding from the economic ministry, and we had two validation partners. That was complete new for us, because before we described the proposal, Schott was in GSI and also Friatec, that is a company close to Mannheim. They said, if you achieve this with these parameters, then you come back, please. However, at the end, this project was not successful. We did it, but we couldn't achieve this parameter. In fact, for high vacuum tightness. But, and now but, this company LNB, as we start with the project, there are more or less two companies in one, I will say. One part of the company produce laser apertures, and the other one laser manufacturing. And this laser manufacturing part, this company, they reduced the employees, because to this time in Germany there was a car price, an automotive price, and so they have to reduce. And as we start with the project, in these companies they had 5 or 6 employees, from 30 employees to 5, 6. Then we started with this project. Today, this company, only this business unit from this company, have more as 40 employees. The reason is, based on this technology for high vacuum technique, this company come in a new business, explosive stuff, Explosionsschutz, excuse me, I cannot, Explosionsschutz. So in fact, for pipelines, and so they went now a complete new market, or they are in a complete new market. And that is quite amazing. And we have a new licensing partner. And by the way, this company LMB, it's now a nice sponsor from GSI. Well, another sample in a complete other field. Well, also one thing, I'll come later to this, we have a big project, it's called FAIR. For this big project, we need a big data center, because a lot of data. Then, of course, from the government, they said, well, here you're in the nature, and you have to, then we are close to Frankfurt, so Frankfurt Airport was a problem, and then, but we need such a big data center. So, and then one tricky guy, a professor from Frankfurt, he said, well, I have an idea to develop a big data center in GSI with energy, how can I say it? We're using the heatness from the big data center to heat also the buildings. Because we have a lot of energy cost with this accelerator and so on. So he developed this. We started 2014 with this project, and there are some parameters. We described this in a proposal and so on that we got from the German Research Ministry, 7 million for the building, by the way, not only for the building. And inside, and now comes technology transfer, there was an idea to create a new supercomputer. And then we won ASUS and AMD for this project. And we achieved in December 2014, with this complete system, the World Championship in the Green 500 list for big data. And since this time, we got over 15 international awards too, and we are nominated in Germany for the Environmental Award 2017. Furthermore, in 1 year, over 80 companies visited GSI, visited this Green IT Cube, and Airbus built such kind of big data center now close to Munich. This complete model system. Well, last but not least, I have to promote it. In the year 2015, December 14, 15, we had a spin out. Well, it's also a case because since 2013, with all the marketing inside, and I would not say a switch the mentality, but that other scientists, young scientists, saw that, what's going on. And in this case, for example, these 4 guys here, these 4 guys, they developed a high performance femtosecond laser. And then, also by the way, we put in a lot of proposals for this company, and they had in the first year over or approximately 500,000 of invest as startup. We did a lot consulting, excuse me. So we consult this company during this time and so on. And they won, by the way, in the startup challenge in Frankfurt, that was a ranking, they won the first prize for the best business model. Well, and this is more or less the reason why we shift to, on one hand, what I said was this right-hand portfolio, and on the other hand, we have a new focus in GSI. In my first slides, you saw this. This is GSI now, and this is fair. This is a new project in our case. So more or less, we get over 4.5 kilometers of new accelerators. This is an international project, by the way. I hope in 2024, it looks like in this case. And these are our shareholders. So in fact, we switched from the national institution to an international institution. And in my case, well, I have to do more or less now a technology transfer also to these countries. And that is, of course, yeah, we have to look how can we handle this. However, at the end, that was a short overview. This slides what I presented, of course, I cannot talk about projects actually. I hope you can understand. We handle in the last 3 years such kind of big portfolio. We switched from licensing till 0 to licensing over 3 billion. And we are not finished. We are not finished, but at the first, we selected. You have to concentrate it, you have to create a framework for your institution or university. Thank you very much. Any questions? If you have any questions?
Basically, as I understand it, I mean, within a very short period of time, by rethinking your model, you redesigned how you did business, and particularly how you work with patents and other important activities that you had, right? You actually, starting about 3 or 4 years ago, you rethought your model, you threw out stuff that you didn't think was going to work, you stayed with stuff that you thought did work, and you really began to develop a major portfolio. And what happened to Siemens? That's what I want to know.
They went away, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. So really, I think as we're going to see some of the later presentations, there's more and more of a connection happening right before our eyes in terms of business and how you rethink business, how you rethink science, and how you use science. I think it's going to be more and more obvious as the day goes on and the years go on that the two must go together in some major way. We're very lucky now to have with us today former Deputy Minister of Education and Science and Chair of the Parliamentary Commission, Mrs. Milena Damjanova, who's taken a lot of time to come to meet us today. We thank you very much because we know you were pressed with other engagements, but we thank you very, very much for taking the time to come. Thank you. Our discussion, as you know, is going to be on policies in science and technology.
Добър ден от мен. Първо бих искала да благодаря на госпожа Мияна Атанасова за поканата. Макар да съзнавам, че като че аз заставам с най-тежката задача пред вас, съзнавайки, че политиците не са обикновено от най-долюбваните, но пък са и хората, на които всички разчитат, че по някакъв начин ще се умеят да направят така, че образованието, науката, бизнеса най-накрая и в нашата страна да започнат да си говорят, да започнат да вървят и да се развиват заедно. Заставам пред вас с ясното убеждение, че всеки един политик трябва да има мисия и кауза. И моята кауза е за развитие на образование и на науката. Заставам пред вас с ясното убеждение, че конкурентоспособност, благосъстояние, икономически растеж може да се постигне единствено и само чрез качествено образование, чрез насърчаване на научните изследвания, чрез технологично развитие и чрез превръщане на резултатите от научните изследвания в икономически и социални ползи. Темата, по която си говорихме, че е добре да представя моите виждания, като ще отворя една скоба и ще кажа, че това не са мои виждания. В рамките на 43-то Народно събрание, когато бях председател на Комисията по образованието и науката, по повод разглеждането на изменения в Закона за развитие на академичния състав в България, академичния състав в България, организирахме една група от млади учени, работна група, която да дава предложения и по закона, за изменения в закона, но и работна група, която да изработи и да сподели идеи за бъдещето и за развитието на науката в нашата страна. Това, което съм се опитала да направя, е да обобщя тези идеи, които аз напълно споделям. защото наистина това е плод на дълги разговори, на дълга работа и аз изключително много благодаря на всички тези, които участваха и с които надявам се ще продължим да работим. Няколко неща успяхме да свършим и не успяхме да свършим в парламентарната комисия. Беше представена, защото когато говорим за развитие на науката в България, разбира се, трябва да започнем от стратегическото ни виждане за нея. Беше внесена в Народното събрание стратегия за развитие на научните изследвания, но тук ще кажа, че ние си позволихме да я върнем за разглеждане, поради простата причина, че нямаше нито едно положително становище по тази стратегия. И поради още една причина, всяка една стратегия трябва да обхваща всички нива на развитие на науката в България, да се постарае да даде визията за развитие на научните изследвания във всяка една сфера. Фундаменталната наука беше пропусната. И аз, като човек, който е свързан с хуманитарната наука, няма как да не съм възмутена от това. Всяка една стратегия, за да бъде ефективна, защото знаете, че в нашата страна имаме доста стратегически документи. Аз не съм привърженик, често казвам, на тези стратегически документи, защото много често там са написани едни хубави неща, които обаче остават само на хартия и след това нищо не се случва. Това, което липсваше на тази стратегия, е много ясен и конкретен план за финансиране и конкретен план за изпълнение и за действие. Надявам се, че в следващите месеци грешките и дефицитите, които бяха констатирани в този стратегически документ, защото той е изключително важен за България, важен и от гледна точка на финансиране през оперативна програма на образование за интелигентен растеж. Вярвам, че дефицитите ще бъдат отстранени и наистина ще имаме една много ясна пътна карта, нека да я наречем така, за развитие на науката в България в следващите години, така че да можем въз основа на тази пътна карта много ясно да планираме източниците на финансиране и да можем да мотивираме колегите, особено моите колеги, които се занимават с финанси, да могат да заделят съответните и нужните средства. Няколко са предизвикателствата, които стоят пред нас в следващите години. На първо място тук ще кажа, не виждам все още професор Костадинов, но се надявам в близките минути буквално да се присъедини към нас, но това, което направихме като изключително положителна стъпка, е изработването и приемането на правилник за оценка на научно-изследователската дейност, която се извършва в висшите училища и в научните организации в България. Това е изключително важно от гледна точка на развитието на научните организации, на финансирането на научните организации и на мотивирането на бизнеса за по-активно сътрудничество с научните организации. Това обаче, което ни предстои или по-скоро предизвикателството, пред което сме изправени, е осъзнаването на факта, че пред новото време, в което живеем, новата епоха, в която живеем, не е в способността за масово производство на материални блага, а в способността за създаване на нови видове, нов вид знания. Още няколко, това е, така сме го квалифицирали като основно предизвикателство. Следващите, как да се помогне на съществуващите фирми да приемат и по-бързо да въвеждат нови технологии. Как да се оцени приносът на науката към развитието на обществото, основано на знанието. Дори аз бих казала, че това е съществено предизвикателство пред нас, защото като че ли все още в България не сме намерили пътя, по който да оценим този принос и тази полза. И не на последно място, как да се финансира науката. Въз основа на резултатите, институционално. Това, което стои пред нас като основна цел и основна задача, безспорно е укрепване на модернизиране на научните организации, от гледна точка на конкурентоспособно и развитие на конкурентоспособни научни изследвания. За да бъдат обаче и резултати на научните изследвания, и модерни научните организации, трябва да се инвестира в хората. Трябва да се инвестира в хората, които правят наука. Затова това, около което ние се обединихме в работната група, е на първо място увеличаване на размера на стипендиите за образователната и научна степен доктор, за да можем наистина да мотивираме младите хора да се занимават с наука. В последните 2 години бяха отпуснати 4,5 милиона лева за подпомагане на проекти на млади учени. Аз съм категорична, че тази програма за грантово финансиране на млади учени в България трябва да продължи, защото няма друг начин, по който да ги привлечем да се занимават с наука, по който да ги привлечем не само да се занимават с наука, но и да възприемат това свое занимание като наистина като нещо, което би могло да донесе ползи и на тях самите, и на страната ни в дългосрочен план. Това, върху което все още имаме да работим, е партньорството между средното образование, тук виждаме и представители от средното образование, което е много показателно за това, че наистина трябва да си говорим в различните сфери, средно, висше образование и научни интереси, от гледна точка наистина на повишаване на младите хора още в ученическа възраст към науката. Възможностите за кариерно развитие също не са все още на необходимото ниво и тук би следвало да помислим от гледна точка на стимулиране и подкрепа на високоефективните изследователи, тук включваме отличия, заплащане според постиженията и разбира се не на последно място нещо, което липсва все още в България, това е въвеждането на постдокторска програма за привличане на изявени млади учени в разработването на социално значими проекти. Тук смятам, че доста изоставаме вече, така че е крайно време наистина да направим тази стъпка. Тук, разбира се, съм включила още няколко неща, които смятаме, че са важни. Мобилност на изследователите от науката в индустрията и обратно. Тук все още като че ли имаме дефицити. Аз лично не мога да определя точно конкретните действия и планът, по който тази мобилност да заработи така, че тя да донесе наистина да бъде превърната в някакви ползи и за едните, и за другите, но това са стъпки наистина, които предстоят, може би да видим и по-ясно и конкретно разписани в стратегията за научни изследвания. По отношение на ефективността на научните изследвания в публично финансираните научни организации, това, около което се обединихме, че е необходимо да бъде въведена редовна и независима оценка на научно-изследователската дейност и това, разбира се, да бъде обвързано с финансирането, т.е. правилникът за оценка, който беше, тук вече професор Константинов беше разработен и който беше приет, просто трябва да влезе в сила и в действие. Финансиране на научни изследвания съобразно националните приоритети за развитие на държавата, това е изключително важно. Всъщност ролята на тази стратегия е да определи ясната посока за развитие на страната, какво искаме да развиваме, как то трябва да бъде развито, по какъв начин да бъде финансирано и нещо важно, изключително ключово е участието на нашите учени, които вече работят в чужбина, което означава и финансиране на реинтеграционни схеми, а именно привличането им за работа именно в тези национално значими проекти и в реализирането на националните приоритети. Нещо, в което също като че остана на заден план в последните години, фонд научни изследвания в България, бих казала, това е болната тема за българската наука. Не веднъж станахме свидетели на лоши практики в фонд научни изследвания. Не веднъж сме правили дискусии за това каква трябва да е съдбата на фонд научни изследвания. Дали трябва да се обедини с Инновационния фонд, например. Това е теза, която се защитава от Световната банка или пък може да бъде предвидено нещо друго. Това обаче, което е ясно, че фонда, всички процедури, които се провеждат в фонда, трябва много ясно да бъдат обосновани, да се извършват по много ясни критерии, за да не останат съмнения, че ще се случва там нещо непрозрачно или пък, че се финансират проекти, спорни проекти от гледна точка на ефективност и от гледна точка на след това на развитие на науката и съответно внедряване на тези резултати в резултатите от проектите в икономиката. Това, което е изключително важно и на което отново ще наблегна, освен всички мерки, които съм посочила тук, няма да се спира до всяка една от тях отделно, защото времето ни е твърде късо и ме предупредиха да имам 3 слайда, аз съм направила 9. Отново ще се върна на насърчаването на сътрудничеството между висшите училища и научните институти от една страна, но и от друга страна насърчаването на сътрудничество с бизнеса. Дали трябва да изградим нова научна инфраструктура или пък да използваме настоящата, това е тема, която така или иначе вече обсъждаме предвид изпълнението и на приоритетите в оперативна програма Наука и образование за интелигентен растеж. Факт е обаче, че и приоритетите, и дейността, и научно-изследователската дейност трябва да се реализират в сътрудничество, защото иначе ще продължим да си работим в отделните сфери. Образованието само за образованието, науката сама за себе си и бизнеса ще продължи може би още години наред да обяснява как няма връзка с пазара на труда и от гледна точка на кадрите, но и от гледна точка на научните изследвания, които обясняваме, които развиваме, и когато стане дума за финансиране, тогава казват защо да ги финансираме, например, в БАН, при положение, че те по какъв начин, с какво точно са допринесли за развитието на икономиката. Аз лично не съм съгласна, обаче да показваме наистина, че имаме желание да работим заедно. Важно е, че имаме съвместни проекти, които вече са дали своите резултати, но това, което липсва, е може тази публичност на тези съвместни успешни проекти, които са изградени, така че наистина да можем да убедим и финансистите, че има хляб в това сътрудничество, що е необходимо, така че да имаме вече големите ползи от гледна точка на сътрудничество, от гледна точка на икономическия растеж и на развитието на нашата страна. Аз наистина се опитах съвсем накратко, предвид времето, да премина през всички идеи, които имахме и които разработихме в работната група. Надявам се, разбира се, този план с конкретни стъпки, бъдещи конкретни стъпки е отворен, така че ще се радваме на вашите предложения и на вашите идеи, защото е дошъл момент, в който наистина нямаме повече време за отлагане и нямаме повече време, което да губим, защото младите хора, виждам слава Богу много такива в тази зала, младите хора си заминават от нашата страна и това мисля, че е един от най-сериозните ни проблеми. Благодаря ви.
Minister, thank you very, very much. I know you had a very important other engagement this morning that you postponed.
I want to thank you very much indeed. Can we have a round of applause again? Thank you. Our next speaker is someone who I've known for many years. I'm not going to tell you how many years. We met shortly after I first ever came to Bulgaria, when I was invited to see this experimental park, almost like a park, really. I mean, wonderful things happening in the bio world. He is recognized himself worldwide as a major and talented leader in this field. And perhaps one of the most interesting things, not interesting, one of the most difficult things that he may have done is to most recently with a lot of time and effort, personal energy, put in place a public-private partnership. And he, probably more than anybody else here today, can tell us what it was like, what he was faced with, how he did it in terms of taking a major, important scientific area of Bulgarian research, linking that to a private investor, and now we'll see where they go next. And it's my great privilege to academic Atanasov.
Най-напред благодаря за поканата да присъстваме на това събитие. Тук съм с колегата Радо Русев, който идва от Universal Bulgarian Investment. Това е швейцарска инвестиционна фирма. Швейцарска инвестиционна фирма, с която преговаряхме близо година и половина и на 1 ноември реалността стана реалност, след като Академичният съвет на Софийския университет даде възможност на фирмата да притежава 30% от дяловете на съвместният геномен център, който бе създаден на книга през 2007 година като малко и средно предприятие, стартъп фирма на Софийския университет и Селско-стопанска академия. Последствие 2010 година, вече след като център бе реално изграден, като висока научно-технологична база, вече става съвместна дейност. Защо практически съм тук поканен? За това, защото, идвайки от академията и бидейки ръководейки Института по генетично инженерство в продължение на 25 години, от 1975 до 2008 година, реализирах, че след толкова годишна работа и постигане на значителни резултати, постигайки това, че Агробиоинститутът става първият център of Excellence на Европейската общност между всички присъединяващи страни, е време и да покажем, че проектите и резултатите, които стоят на лавицата, трябва да намерят своето приложение. Може би 2007 година беше рано. Като че ли още не сме напълно готови, мисля, че вече 2017 година е време научните постижения, толкова доколкото те са още все живи, или стари постижения, или нови. Тук имаме колеги от Българската академия на науките. Е време вече да срещнат интереса на бизнеса. И толкова доколкото и бизнеса и него го нямаше, той първо израстваше, е време да се срещнат и да се видят една малка страна с огромен научен потенциал, в която и биотехнологиите, и химията, и физиката, и нанотехнологиите, и особено информационните технологии бяха върхови развити. Така че мисля, че с това поведение аз правя на 8 февруари 50 години научен стаж в областта чисто на науката, да видим България може ли вече нещо да се направи в тази насока. Няма да се спирам толкова подробно. Това е мисия, която практически тепърва ще подлежи на реализация, за това, защото 7-те години, в която ние трябваше да развием и да покажем на себе си и на света, че това, което го казах, е реалност, не можа да стане, защото нямаше закон до 1 март миналата година, в който да се даде възможност, че звена, които ги създава научна организация, академия, университетите, могат да бъдат истински и малки средни предприятия. Сега това нещо е факт. Сега ние имаме интереса и на швейцарската инвестиционна фирма, така че е време да покажем било с проекти, било с конкретни реални резултати. И аз във втората част ще дам възможност на колегата Радослав Русев да каже за какво става дума. Това всичко, което се опитах да го кажа в момента е как геномният център в областта на биоекономиката би могъл да се превърне в истински мост като добър модел, който да покаже връзката между академията, между помощното познание и реалния бизнес, и ако щете и на държавата, защото държавата и тя има определени интереси, които трябва да бъдат задоволени във всякакъв аспект. И както виждате, примерно един високотехнологичен анализ на контрол и безопасност на храните, който по същество е твърде силно занижен. Така че виждате в тази схема, без да се спирам отново в подробности, в крайна сметка и така трябва да реализираме и да станем един сериозен инкубатор в областта на биоекономиката, за да може прототипите в крайна сметка да се превърнат в спин-оф фирми и в крайна сметка новите продукти да намерят истинска реализация. Една от големите предимства, както знаете, че България е може би най-богатата в света, като малка страна на биологично или на генетично биоразнообразие. И тази зародишна плазма, а не съм го измислил аз, който е казал, че който има зародишната плазма, той ще има бъдещето. Така че, почивайки на тази основа, ние избягваме конкуренцията с нашите западни партньори, а по-скоро с нашите познания и възможности, било технологични, методични, и с уникалната зародишна плазма можем да се допълваме по начин, който би ни позволил по-ефективно да развиваме бизнес. Това са проектите, които сме се опитвали с скромните възможности да ги развиваме в годините. И тук практически голямата възможност е това, че работейки високите технологии и очаквайки четвъртата генерация на секвениране, ще ни позволи възможност утре в други ден на дешифрирането на един геном човешки, пък и да се извършва в рамките на 24 часа, че дори и по-малко, и цените на такива услуги да бъдат в рамките на 100-200 лева, може би това след 5 години ще стане реалност. И бяхме в Холандия, където вече видяхме четвъртата генерация на секвениране. Това означава, че скоро може да очакваме това. Цените да паднат и тогава може би ще имаме възможност нашите уникални продукти за човешкото здраве в дясната страна да ги срещнем геномите на продукта, растение, животно или каквото ще да е микроорганизъм, както е нашето уникално днешно кисели бактерии. И с тези на нашия геном, защото всеки геном по себе си е специфичен, така че секвенирайки себе си, човек ще знае слабите и силните страни и ще знае как да помага за своето здраве, как да избегне своите дефекти. Така че в този случай България има уникалния шанс. Тя няма да може да нахрани света, защото сме малки, но да покаже кои продукти биха могли да използваме по начин, по който могат да помогнат за човешкото здраве, в съчетание с уникалните минерални води, които надвишават повече от 15 000 и над близо 1000 спа, означава, че ние сме богати още от сега и не трябва да се оплакваме, че сме бедна държава. Това е един пример, в който примерно се опитахме в рамките на 7 години, и то успешно, защото в крайна сметка завърши с проект последната рамкова програма. И новини, как да направим и да покажем, че нашия магрут, нашето вино магрут е уникално. И ние наистина доказахме, че вино Нуари и магрут се отличава с най-високо съдържание на транс и цистерезверотрол, които са съставките с най-високо антиоксидантно съдържание, т.е. тези съставки, които елиминират свободните радикали и по този начин се освобождават от стреса, независимо какъв е той. Така че ни предстои огромна задача по всички останали, които преди малко тук вие видяхте на тази схема. Разбира се, тук няма да се спирам отново на подробности. Това са практически геномните технологии в лицето на геномиката, метаболомиката, транскриптомиката, заедно с биоинформатиката, защото знаете, че без информационните технологии нищо не може да се направи. Практически в момента, след като вече имаме взаимодействието с Universal Bulgarian Investment, имаме 3 платформи, с които първият Agronomics за ускоряване и завръщане на старата слава на българските сортове, културни растения, особено полските, защото семената чуждите отново почнаха да, не отново, а доминират в нашата производствена практика. И трябва да дадем един пуш на земеделието, така да се каже. Втората е свързана с това, с което са поначало геномния център искат да реализират това за бизнеса, особено хранителни и фармацевтични. И третия е как ние можем да запазим уникалното, да съхраним и правилно да използваме биологичното разнообразие. Това практически е свързано с няколко конкретни проекта, с които да речем един е насочен особено имплементирането на биологичните методи или органи фарм, както се казва на английски език, да стимулираме биологичното земеделие в България, защото може би промените 25-28 години ли станаха, екологията е убедено най-добрият елемент за това, че станахме екологично по-чисти. И сега практически ще дам думата на колегата. Патентите, които през тези 7 години се умяхме да разработим в тази насока, искам да дам думата да завърши колегата Радослав Русев с това взаимодействие, което ми осигури.
Благодаря, професоре. Тъй като гледаш много назад с времето и не искам да ви отекчавам излишно, бих искал да се спра само на два слайда, с което искам да се надявам, че ще бъдат много конкретни. Аз представлявам една компания, която през последните 10 години се опитва да инвестира в българското земеделие. Средно голяма компания. И през последните 2 години обаче решихме, че има голям смисъл да го направим през наука. Това, което виждате на този слайд е една инвестиция, която тя е в процес на развиване, но това е сграда в комплекса на Държавния земеделски институт, една от 24-те структури на на Селскостопанска академия. Тъй като ние инвестираме в, да го нарека, ново поколение селекционна и семепроизводителна дейност, решихме да направим един комплекс, научно-изследователски сертификационен комплекс, това е абревиатурата, който да прави да прави така наречените регионално адаптирани сортове, типични български култури, демек пшеница и слънчоглед. И в тази стратегия създадохме един лабораторен и аналитичен комплекс, който прави, като се почне стандартните почвени, растителни, фитопатологични, микробиологични изследвания и се стигне до доста по-интересните тихофлуидни селекционни дейности. Това нещо е действащ комплекс. Беше открит преди няколко месеца в близо до Генерал Тошево, село Петлешко, където е кампуса на Института по пшеница и слънчогледа на Селскостопанска академия. Честно да ви кажа, след доста ходени по мъките и чукане по вратата на Селскостопанска академия, Министерството на земеделието и други структури, които ще трябва да се занимават с наука в България, решихме да го направим цял част с частни пари. Инвестицията не е по-знае колко голяма, но е изцяло частна. В нея вече има няколко учени, които творят. Но това, което според мен е по-интересно е в контекста на днешното събитие, с което поздравя на организаторите и на професор Чемитари думата да го спомена това нещо, е, че ние осъзнахме, че тази не просто приложена, не бих казал полева дейност, това нещо е в съседство с полетата на 5-6 км от Генерал Тошев, на 30 км от Добрич, северо-изток. Дори една така относително дейност, в която е въвлечена приложната наука, не би имала толкова бързи резултати, ако не се бяхме кооперирали с вече по-високата наука, това, което академиката Насов преди малко представи. Да всъщност, не там сказвам това, което искам да кажа е, че този комплекс, който създадохме в Генерал Тошево, който създава селекционни програми, създава семена, създава нови сортове, за сега пшеница, скоро слънчоглед. Разбрахме, че има нужда да се комбинира и с по-високото ниво на наука, или по-ниско, как се казва, не знам. Това, което прави Геномния център, затова през миналата година направихме Това истинско публично-частно партньорство, мисля, то е такова. 70% собственост на Софийския университет, 30% собственост на нашата компания. И с абсолютно практична цел, леко чувство, нали, за кауза, решихме да комбинираме дейността, дейността в Генерал Тошево, дейността на полето, с това е биологическия факултет, който е геномният център е на последния етаж. Това, което истинската българска наука, която комбинира аграрния и микробиологичния и геномния подход, в рамките на един доста малък екип от 3-4 човека под супервизията и визията на професор Атанасов, успява да прави, са точно тези дейности, които са с доста висока добавена стойност, които са трудни, тъй като ние работим с селекционери от региона, водещия ни селекционер е всъщност, може би най-добрият селекционер от пшеницата от Сърбия. За мен беше лично много показателно, като човек, който преди 2 години съм се занимавал с подобни неща, че неща, които водещите селекционни и семепроизводителни институти от Източна Европа правят, те си пращат тая работа в Канада. В момента геномният център прави част от тези неща. Визирам така наречената Market Assisted селекция. Това, което селекционерите успеят да направят на полето, микробиолозите в лабораторията и в офиса го разкодират посредством секвениране на генома на новите сортове. Да, всички тези неща, ние сме се спирали за останалите проекти, в които се опитваме съвместно да инициираме, но това го давам като един пример как анализа на биотичния и агнотичния стрес, това, което според мен на този етап е най-важната практична помощ, свързана с Market Assisted селекцията. Говоря тук за феномика, геномика, за приложение на тези сфери на дейността на геномния център. В сферата на нутригеномиката вече изследваме, или поне ще изследваме новите сортове от към техните свойства, а пък и както академикът спомена, стъпваме на съществуваща генбанка и искаме да я доразвием. Това нещо е пример за две неща. Как практичната и полевата дейност на един изследователски комплекс, който работи на полето, или поне за полето, си сътрудничи с един изследователски комплекс, който е приложна наука, която обаче е много по-близко до базовата, до фундаменталната наука. Това е част от университет и като академична структура, и като изследователска, и като физическа инфраструктура, ако щете. Цялото това нещо, което ви говоря в момента, се прави без нито един лев грантово, публично, донорско или някакво друго финансиране, с идеята, че по този начин ще завъртим колелото. Лично моята работа е да генерираме няколко смислени, за съжаление малки възлагания, по които бизнеса, в случая тази селекционно-семепроизводителна компания, в която сме инвестирали, създава и възлага тези дейности на геномния център. И това нещо вече 4-5 месеца му виждаме смисъла, резултата. Мисля, че знаем как да го направим продължаващо. Опитваме се да привличаме и други компании в подобно нещо и се надявам малко по малко самия геномен център като научно-изследователска структура да намери правилната комбинация от частно, за сега наша, надявам се и други хора да скочат в тази инициатива, и публично и грантово финансиране. Много благодаря на организаторите, че са ни поканили тук, тъй като лично аз се възползвам от кафе, паузи, обяди и дискусиите след обяда, за да си поговоря с хора, които правят на други места по друг начин. Определено в България липсва разбиране за това как проблема не е липсата на пари, пари има много, за държавата чуи как да ги даде, ама никой не знае как да ги вземе. Ние също не знаем, търсим това нещо в момента. И по трудния начин, най-напред със слагането на масата на малко частни пари, говорим за доста малки бюджети. Накратко казвам, ще се радвам да имаме смислена дискусия и по време на панелите, и по време на кафе, паузи, обяди и други възможности да си говорим за това как се прави това нещо. Благодаря ви.
Thank you. I think that brings us brings us to the coffee break, finally. But I just find this particular presentation that we just had amazingly fabulous, because this is one of the great skills of Bulgaria, one of the great areas of skill of Bulgaria, one of the great science areas of Bulgaria. And to see that finally beginning to be moving into a commercial framework, all I can say is one more round of applause for the academic, please. Thank you. Coffee break, guys, if you want to go out and take a cup of coffee and biscuity. Okay, let's see. Go there.
I just said hello and I was talking right now.
Sorry.
She's everything what everybody said. Money comes from